Hello, my name is Lisa LaPlante, and I am a teacher here at the English department at Tri-County Regional Vocational Technical High School. Today I'm joined by a remarkable woman by the name of Maurine Daw, who was a major in the United States Army during the Vietnam conflict. During Maurine's time in the Army, she served 2 years in Vietnam, first at Nha Trang, second at Long Binh 24th Evac Hospital, and then at the 95th Evac Hospital in Da Nang. Welcome, Maurine, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our discussion today.
First, where are you from?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay, and you grew up in the 60s, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about life in the 60s.
As you know, that was a time of civil rights, a lot of demonstrations and things like that. So, well, I should say that my family was from Pittsburgh, and that's a steel mill town. And my father worked in a steel mill, but he was often out of work. There was no unemployment. So my childhood memories are those of not having enough to eat because my father didn't have a regular paycheck. So that part was very hard. In the 60s, of course, I remember going down south with my mother to visit some friends in North Carolina. And when we crossed over into Maryland, I think it was, all African Americans had to move to the back of the bus. And I remember that. And it was a Greyhound bus. And when we stopped for rest stops, we could not use the regular bathrooms. We had to use one that said colored only. And they would not serve us in the rest stops. We had to go to the back of the building, and there was a little window that was open just a few inches, and you would say what you wanted. And I think I got a grilled cheese sandwich, and they sort of shoved it out the window. And I asked my mother about that, and she said, well, that's just the way things are down here. So, but we had some similar problems up north as well.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your education in both high school and college?
I think I really was a person who loved to go to school. And I remember having my first library card when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I loved reading. So even though when I was in high school, I was in a recently integrated school, and they really didn't like having African American students there, and so they didn't talk to us very much. But I had a drive to read. I read so much on my own, and I just, even though the teachers sort of neglected me, I listened very carefully, and I was able to graduate from high school.
Very good. Now, can you describe your interactions with your high school teachers a little bit?
It was kind of sad. Like I said, I didn't have any friends, and there was no socializing after school because we weren't allowed to go into some of the places. Like the Y, for example, was where a lot of teens went after school, but we were not permitted in there. One thing that really hurt was my school counselor refused to talk to me because I wanted to go to college. And in this high school, they told us that we should take the general track because we didn't need to go to college. We would get jobs as domestics or ditch diggers. That's what they said. I thought, not for me. I want to go to college. So I pressed them, and they ended up putting me in the college track.
Beautiful. Tell us about life after high school.
I got a scholarship for 1 year to go because I took the SATs and I got a scholarship. And then a women's club gave me a scholarship also, so I was able to get into college for my first year. But after that, I had no money, and so I took out a loan in college. I should say I went to Hampton Institute in Virginia. That's where I went to school. Um, I really had a desire to be a writer when I was in high school, but my school counselor refused to talk to me. So I went into nursing because in those days you were either a nurse, teacher, or a secretary, or you got married. And so I chose nursing because my mother had passed away when I was 12 years old, and I wanted to see what I could do to help other people. So when I was in college, I was confronted with the fact that I didn't have enough money to finish a 4-year program. So I got recruited in college. I went to, we were told that there was going to be a meeting with a recruiter. I went there and listened, and it sounded like a gift from heaven. They would pay for my education. They would give me a stipend each month, which was $99, but for a college student back then, that was a lot of money, you know. So I thought, I want to sign up. So it was basically because of a need rather than any politics or anything like that. And when I first went to Hampton, like I said, the civil rights, I went to Hampton in 61 to 65. And there were demonstrations about trying to get to eat at food counters. And I remember going into a department store. I wanted to buy a hat, and I wanted to buy some shoes, and they would not let me try them on. So you had to just buy things outright. So that was the kind of situation at college, and I was not, our nurses had to go for training at a segregated hospital. So that was kind of difficult.
Okay, so you said you were recruited while you were in college. That's basically how you ended up going to Vietnam. So can you just tell us a little bit about your sense of Vietnam before you actually enlisted?
I'll have to be honest to say that I did not know a lot about the politics of Vietnam. I kept hearing about these people who were setting themselves on fire in Vietnam as a means of protesting, and I thought that's very serious. So I didn't really know that what was going on was that the American politicians were trying to prevent a domino effect of communism just coming across, taking over all these countries, and they were trying to keep them out of Vietnam. But Vietnam had been in wars for years and years. The French had been there too.
Can you describe, how did your family react to your enlistment?
They accepted it very well, and they signed the papers for me to be in the military.
Good, okay. And can you describe your experience at your first duty station?
After I graduated from Hampton, I graduated from Hampton, and the same day that I graduated, I got commissioned into the military, which meant that now I can formally wear a uniform. I got a gold bar put on me that was for second lieutenant, and I got orders to go to Letterman in San Francisco. Now I was on the East Coast. I'd never been out of the state back basically too much, and to go all the way over to Letterman was I was anxious about it. I went by myself, and so I showed up at Letterman, and kind of like they were trying to figure out what to do with me, so they put me on a ward where there was a major who happened to be African American, so they put me with her.
Can you describe some of your duties at Letterman?
I was, like I said, I was a second lieutenant, which meant I was low ranking. The major was in charge, and she worked the day shift. So I got put on the evenings and night shift, and they told me, do not awake the doctors, do not call the doctors unless it was life or death. Now I had just gotten out of nursing school, and that was a big pressure for me. If I had a patient that looked like he was kind of having a problem, I had to decide, is this a real problem or do I need to call the doctor? So I think that I was overloaded when I first started as a nurse there. And I remember that I would go to the nurse's dorm was connected to the hospital. So when I got off shift, I just walked down the corridor and I was in the nurse's dorm. And I would just fall on my bed, fall asleep. And I started sleepwalking actually, because I would get up in my room checking IVs, walking around checking IVs in my room. It got so bad, the sleepwalking got so bad that I went to a doctor and I told him that I can't cut the cord from the job and the dorm. And he said, well, that's not unusual, and he put me on Librium. So that was the first time, they always give women drugs to calm them down. So they put me on Librium. So actually it just took a matter of time till I got used to having so much pressure put on me.
So, you were stationed at Letterman Hospital from 1965 to 1966. You said you had a duffel bag ready to go just in case you received orders to Vietnam, which you did. Can you please tell us about your first days in Vietnam?
Yes. We left Travis Air Force Base headed for Vietnam, and there were about 175 of us headed to the hospital that we were supposed to be assigned to. And when we got to Saigon, I looked down, I saw the rice paddies and green of the country and everything. We arrived in Saigon. It was a very hot, dusty day. We all filed off the airplane. People were looking at us because there were a lot of women there, a lot of us nurses. Anyway, buses took us over to a place called Camp Alpha, which was for billeting purposes. And as we were leaving the Air Force Base there, Tan Son Nhut, I saw all these bunkers along the route, and I thought, my goodness, somebody has to guard this Air Force, these planes. And I thought, I would want to be out there at night guarding those planes. I remember thinking of that, so it was sort of like fear. This is serious. Anyway, we got to Camp Alpha, and there was like a place where we could all sort of congregate, and they gave us the news that the 24th Evac Hospital in Long Binh, where we were all assigned, has been rocketed, and it was unsafe to go there. It had been rocketed more than once, over and over again, and it was unsafe to send people to go to that hospital. So we would have to go on temporary duty for 3 months to other places. So then we were all, basically, on paper, we were all split up to go different places. That particular night, our first night in Vietnam, there was some rockets going off, and you could hear the sounds, and we were told to get to the bunkers, but they said, don't walk, crawl, because things are going through the air and you might get hit. So I said, this is serious. So I remember crawling on my hands and knees to the bunker until we got the all clear. That was our first day. We spent a few days there milling around, wondering when we would all get our orders to go wherever we were supposed to go. So mine came. I was going to go to the 8th Field Hospital in Nha Trang, never heard of it. And we boarded this plane, a transport plane, and it took us to Nha Trang. The pilots let me sit up front with them, so I sat in the window with the pilots, and I got to see all over the country from Saigon up to Nha Trang, which is north. And the pilot, while he's in air, he gives all these, on the radio to stop here, stop there. So it was kind of a zigzag trip up to Nha Trang, but we finally got there very tired. When I got to the 8th Field Hospital, I remember going to sleep that night. I didn't have to go right to work that day, but the next day I was in uniform and I went to the hospital. And I remember the nurses sitting at the desk, and they told them who I was and everything, and they just kind of nodded, and they went back to what they were doing. And it was kind of sad for me because nobody really jumped up and said, "Oh, we're so happy to have another nurse," because that's what really should have been. And they never oriented me. They never told me where to find anything. And so I just started walking around. And I'd been at Letterman for a year, just almost a year. And so I, kind of knew the ropes. And I found where the medicine was, the linens, the bedpans, all those things. And so then they gave me my assignment, my patients to take care of. And that was basically my welcome to the hospital. I remember having, in Vietnam, you have a lot of buildings like Quonset huts or whatever, and there's patients here, patients. So usually, when you work off in the evening or night, you work all those buildings by yourself. So I have worked up to 3-4 buildings of patients at one time, just me as a nurse. And then you'd have a corpsman in each one of the buildings to, maintain some decorum while you were not there. So I remember Nha Trang as being just a real hard workplace for me. While I was there, I remember I had up to 99 patients on a shift, which was really difficult. Not all of them were bed patients, but I was responsible for their medicines and things like that. One thing about soldiers, even if they're on crutches, they'll get up and help another soldier. And if it weren't for that, I think it would have been very hard. They used to ask me, what can I do to help? Can I do this? Can I do that for you? These are soldiers who are already wounded or injured. They would help each other.
Can you describe what it was like being in Nha Trang, and maybe including some of your off time, if you had any at all? What was that like?
Like I said, I worked really hard. It wasn't just one building. It was 2, 3, 4 buildings that you took care of. So I worked really hard taking care of all the doctor's orders and everything. So on my days off, I did things that I wasn't supposed to do, because I think I had seen too many John Wayne movies before coming to Vietnam, if you remember Green Beret and things like that. And I thought I was indestructible. I was young and not too smart, but I used to ride a bicycle. I don't remember how I got that bicycle, but I used to ride the bicycle down where the Vietnamese people lived, and I wanted to know about them. And I used to go into their, it was like a covered area. It was the area where they had their shops, where they would buy food and clothing and things like that. And it would be covered with tarps. So it was like you'd go in there and you might never come out, So I would go in there just very innocently, and they never hurt me or harmed me at all. And Nha Trang was also on the South China Sea. And when I was at Hampton, I was on the swim team. We did water ballet, so I loved swimming. So every time I could get out to the China Sea, I would just go swimming. And other Americans would be there too.
Can you describe your overall impression of the Vietnamese?
Well, I had no problems with them. I took care of a lot of Vietnamese. This is South Vietnamese, of course. I took care of a lot of South Vietnamese on my ward who'd been injured. I learned to appreciate them. I also had an opportunity to work on a POW ward as well. And that was at Long Binh. POW ward was there. So, now the POW ward, they would have a military police at each end of the ward. So when you come on shift, you got police in there. And we treated them just like they were Americans. We gave them the same treatment. I remember doing a lot of IVs and things like that, blood. The Vietnamese usually had a lot of other underlying conditions. They might have tuberculosis, you name it, they had it before coming into our hospital. I think I felt first that I wanted to be altruistic and then I felt like they don't really like us, and they never did. And so I think my feelings kind of changed because I felt like I'm not going to make any friendships among the POWs, but I continued to treat them well.
Mm-hmm. So you were stationed at Nha Trang from 1966 to 1967. In 1967, you reported to Long Bin, the 24th Evac Hospital. Could you describe your time there?
Yes, the 24th Evac Hospital became known as the head trauma hospital. I was there on opening day. We actually cut a ribbon, so I was there for that. And I don't know who decided, but they put me in emergency room there. Never had worked in emergency room before, but I really enjoyed it. I had a sergeant there. You know, if you're an officer, a young officer, you have to respect your sergeant, your enlisted men, because they really know the ropes. And if you listen to them, they'll really keep you out of a lot of trouble. So I had a really good enlisted man who showed me the ropes in emergency room. He showed me how to prepare everything so that when you know things started coming in, you're ready to go. So when we had downtime, we made sure our IVs were hung on ready to go. All our equipment was ready to go. And so I enjoyed working in the emergency room. We were right next, there was a radio room right next to the emergency room, and there were some guys in there monitoring the radios, and all of a sudden you'd hear this loud noise. It was this static, and something was happening. A helicopter was coming in. It would tell you the expected time of arrival. It might be 10 minutes, your adrenaline is pumping, and the helicopter would land right outside the door, and they bring the stretchers in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'd smell the smoke in their flak jackets from their wound, they've been shot, and you bring them in, you have to take all that stuff off. You make sure there's no live grenades around and stuff like that. You cut everything off, and then you start looking for wounds. You might see a wound in the front, but you got to look in the back too. See where did it go all the way through, or there other wounds. And then you start getting your IVs. You don't just put one IV in, you have to usually put 2, 3 IVs in, depending on their injuries.
Okay. At the 24th Evac Hospital, can you describe some of the injuries that you treated?
24th Evac Hospital, as I said, became known as the head trauma hospital. However, we did have a lot of medical cases there. One side of the hospital, one area of the hospital was surgery and post-op, and then across from that was all the medical wards, POW, and all that. So I have to say about our doctors. The doctors worked, I know they worked 48 hours in a row, some of them, between when those head cases came in, because any trauma to the head, you can't just fix that in an hour or two. They work long hours, and you have to give them a lot of credit for saving a lot of lives. However, I remember once these patients got through post-op and they ended up on my side, because I worked in emergency room for a short period, and then when we started getting so many patients in, they pulled me to work on the wards to take care of the patients. So I remember taking some of these young men with brain injuries, and now they call that the traumatic brain injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. They had them in Vietnam too. And I remember taking them and walking them, sitting them outside in the sun, and they, some of them didn't know who they were. It was very sad. And they would eventually get evac to probably Japan and then back home. So that was always difficult to see the ones who they survived the surgery and all, but you don't know what happened to them afterwards. So. I said, I had to leave the emergency room to go care for patients on the wards that had other problems as well.
I know that you went above and beyond and took measures to care for the patients, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about the above and beyond steps that you took to care for these young men who were injured.
We had a lot of patients that had facial injuries, and they had their jaws wired shut actually. And there was, we had a mess hall that put out basically regular diets, American food, pizza, fried chicken, and all that kind of stuff, you know. And they would send a tray of that kind of food for everybody, and my patients that had wired mouths, you know, we tried to see what we could do to mash their food up as best we could. So what I did, I said, this is impossible. So in those days, Sears and Roebuck had a catalog where you could order things and then it would be shipped, and they even shipped to a PO or addresses overseas. So I ordered a couple of blenders from Sears and Roebuck, and I started blenderizing the food for the soldiers. And I have to tell you, they were so happy, and they say, you saved our lives, thank you so much. They were very appreciative, and I get very emotional about it to this day, how appreciative they were of just that little touch. The mess hall was sending them over regular food and they couldn't really eat it, but the blenders really helped them.
How did you comfort the soldiers?
Well, as I told you, that I often had to work evenings and nights, and a lot of times when I got on shift, they would say, call my name out, and they were so happy to see me because I was the nurse who gave them a bath, brought water for them to shave, and things like that. Because during the day shift, apparently they didn't get around to doing that too much, and I took that upon myself to make sure that they, you know, got clean linen and all of those things, beside my regular duties of IVs and medicine. And they would often clap when I came on duty. It's pretty good to have your patients clap for you, just because you're giving them a basin of hot water to wash up.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you provided companionship and friendship to some of the soldiers. You had to, and I know that you did that on your off time. Would you mind describing that to me a little bit?
I'd like to go back a bit to my childhood. When I was 12 years old, my mother passed away, and I went to live with my uncle and aunt. He was a pastor. I stayed with them from the age of 12 to 17 when I went off to college. When I was a nurse in Vietnam, I had a patient who was very sick, a young man, and he was in a coma, and they didn't know what was wrong, why he wouldn't come out of this coma. So I started praying for him, and I said that, you know, basically, he's not going to die. I remember just standing by him, holding his hand and praying, he's not going to die, he's not going to die. And one day, I went in there, and that young man opened his eyes, just as if he had been asleep for a short time. He just opened his eyes, and I thought, that's a miracle. And I saw what prayer could do, and that was on my mind, you know, to pray for my patients. One day I was in the emergency room, and they had gotten in some men who were dead on arrival. I went in there, and in my mind, they all looked like they had come from New York. They looked like street guys from New York, and I thought Brooklyn maybe, something like that. And I thought, these young men are loved, and I know there's a mother somewhere that would want to be here to pray over their son who was dead on arrival in the hospital. So I went to each of those men and I took their hand and I prayed over them like a mother would. And after that, I just said, I know that these ones who are dying or dead on arrival, that there's a mother, wife, somebody somewhere who would want to do this. So I was like a surrogate. So every opportunity that I had, I would do that. One time, this young man came in who had fallen out of the tower, guard tower, on his head, and they X-rayed him, and they said, and this was done often with really bad injuries. It was like a triage. They come in and they would X-ray them, and if they felt there wasn't a chance to save them, they put them behind the curtain. And I thought, that's very hard. So this man, he fell off the tower. They X-rayed him and they thought he had no chance. So that particular night, I was there as a night supervisor, which means I just had to walk around and check on everybody. So I had time to go back and sit with him. He didn't pass away that night. So the next morning I came, he was still alive, and I sat with him until he passed away. So, there were times that I just felt like I had to be the mother that was sitting there.
Maurine, I see here that you've taken quite a bit of pictures during your time in Vietnam, and I was wondering if you might be able to show us and tell us a little bit about some of these pictures.
Yes, I'll show you at the front here some of the buildings that we had, some of the structures that we worked in. I took care of Vietnamese children, and you'll see pictures of them. And there's a picture. I had an opportunity when I was in Da Nang to work with the Bob Hope Christmas show. That would have been in December of 1970. And they were asking for female volunteers, nurses, to come and work backstage because they had all these women dancers and things like that. So I got to do that, and when the show started, they allowed me to come up on stage and behind the curtain there and watch the show, which that was a lot of fun. We took care of children who had been wounded, South Vietnamese children who had been wounded. We took care of children who came from orphanages that had injuries that, not injuries, but situations like we had a spina bifida child, and that child would never have gotten care in an orphanage. A few pictures of myself and where I lived. A few pictures of the soldiers. We had a chapel there, and we used to have a Bible study where the soldiers would come in and have Bible study and prayer.
At the end of your second year of service, you returned back to America in 1967 to Fort Ord Army Hospital in California as a first lieutenant, where you made captain. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that third year of your enlistment?
Yes, I was working on a ward that had a lot of patients who had come from Vietnam, injuries of different kinds. One day, this patient showed up on my ward, and I actually knew him, but his hair was completely white. Now, he was only in his 20s, and I said, "Hi, well, how did you end up here, and everything?" I said, "What happened to your hair?" And he said, well, he was in Long Binh with me, and he said he was taking that route from Long Binh to Saigon. It's about 18 miles. It's very deadly at the wrong time. Well, they got ambushed on that road, and he hid under a person who had died, and he was afraid that they would come and, shoot everybody to make sure they were dead. And because of that, his hair turned completely white, and he ended up, sometime later in the States, and he ended up on my ward. He told me that story. I believed him because I was on that road many times myself on my days off, and I knew I might not, one day I might get ambushed too, but you just try to not think about it. Anyway, that particular ward that I was on was called septic orthopedics, and the soldiers had wounds that would not heal because of continuous bacterial infection. And I got to be very close to them because it was like we wanted them to get better because they could not leave the hospital and be with their families until that sepsis had been cleared up. So whenever somebody got discharged, it was like a big party, that we could see them leave. We had this one man he was a married man, and he was there almost a year. And when he got to go home, we were so happy for him. It was a long journey. He had a cast all the way up to his hip, and he kept having problems. So we were very happy when he got to go home.
While you were working at Fort Ord, where did you live?
Well, that's another story. When I first got to Fort Ord, there was not enough billeting for officers, which means they didn't have room for office. They were crowded, and we had to find our own quarters. So I started looking in the newspaper and finding, vacancies, and I would make appointments to see an apartment. But when I got there, and they opened the door, or sometimes they didn't open the door, they just looked out the window and they saw me and they wouldn't open the door. And so I got the idea from that they didn't want to rent to me maybe because of my color, I don't know. But I was very disappointed. I said I spent a year in Vietnam and couldn't find a place to live in California. So I was able to I did find a place to live. It was a not very nice place, but it was over in a garage. This black family rented to me. It was over a garage. And I stayed there probably about 4 months until quarters was available on the post there.
Very good. So after September 1968, when you finished your 3rd year working for the Army, what then?
Well, I had heard about school nursing, and I found out there was a job in Cleveland, Ohio, and I applied and I got accepted there to be a school nurse in Cleveland, Ohio. This, in '68, the war was still going on, but there was a lot of stuff going on in America. A lot of people nowadays don't know, but there were cities being set on fire, sort of kind of like what's going on now, I guess you might say. And so there had been rioting in Cleveland, and it was not that safe. I chose to try to find a place to live that was not too close to those unsafe areas, which I did find. And I worked as a school nurse. The pay, believe it or not, was about $200 a month at that time, and so it wasn't enough to pay for my expenses. So I went and got a job at the Veterans Hospital working the night shift, which means that I worked basically 7 days a week. I started having hallucinations. I kept seeing somebody coming in my room with a knife to kill me. It was really bad. And part of it was because I was working 7 days a week, and another part was because I had no debriefing from all my military experiences. And I actually had a breakdown, to say the least. So that was around March of the school year. I called my family and I said, I can't cope here. I'm just having too many nightmares and things. And so they said, call the movers and just let them come and pack your stuff, which I did. And then I went back to I went to California where my family was living at the time, and I stayed with them for about 3 months, not working at all because I just couldn't. However, while I was there, I sought psychiatric help myself. I went to a psychiatrist, and I told him I was having all these problems about Vietnam and everything, but I really wanted to go back to Vietnam because I knew there was so much work to be done over there. And he said, well, it's up to you. You have to make that decision. So after 3 months of not working, I went to the Veterans Hospital there in Fresno, and they hired me as a nurse. So I worked there as a nurse for a little time, and then I started hearing that they needed nurses in Vietnam again. So I applied to go back to Vietnam.
So you didn't just volunteer to go to Vietnam one time, you volunteered twice.
Yes.
That is honorable and heroic. So let's talk about that. In August of 1970, you headed to Da Nang to work at the 95th Evac Hospital. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I was a captain, of course. When I got out of the military, I was a captain, so I showed up there as a captain, and all the head nurses at the 95th were captains. So I said, let's see what's going to happen, because sometimes I'm like, when I show up at places and they just don't expect to have a black nurse. So I was glad they gave me my own ward. It was called Ward 7. So from that day, day one to when I left Vietnam, I was still head nurse at Ward 7. They never took me off. I never had to go to the supervisor to get chewed out or anything. I felt I did a good job there.
Good. And I was just going to ask, how were you generally treated as an African American woman who was also an officer in Vietnam?
I had a wonderful doctor who was in charge of Ward 7. Each ward had a doctor who was in charge. His name was Dr. Straight, and I had a lot of respect for him, and I felt he had a lot of respect for me, and we worked well together. There wasn't anything I couldn't ask him to do, and a lot of times he stayed right there on the ward. You'd see him sleeping on an empty bed because we had a patient that was, sort of fragile, and he would not leave. So it was always good to see that he was there when we had that happen. So I had good experiences there as far as work experience because of the doctor. Now I did go to Dr. Straight to tell him that the psychiatric doctor was not very friendly to me. He kind of wanted to give his orders to other nurses, and they had to tell him, well, Captain Daw's in charge. So I spoke to Dr. Straight about that. He says, well, I don't think he's, got a problem, but I'll talk to him. And so he did, and I never had any more problems after that.
Can you talk to us a little bit about Ward 7 and some of the patients that you saw there and some of your duties?
Well, if I told you the truth, I think few people would believe it, but it actually happened. Dr. Straight was a cardiologist, so anybody that had a heart attack or any kind of heart problems was put on our ward. At the same time, we had some people that should not have been on the ward next to a person having a heart attack, and that was their psychiatric patients, which we had. Actually, most of them were trying to come down off of drugs, and so they would really, scream a lot and things like that. We had infectious diseases like hepatitis. We had wounds, soldiers who had been wounded, they'd been in post-op and were able to get out of there, and they'd come to our ward until they were better to go back to duty. We had all kinds of things on the medical side, and then we had labor and delivery. We had women who came in to have babies. We had newborns and we had pediatrics, all in one ward, and probably some other things too. But it was like a catch-all.
So you said there were about 50 beds, and you mentioned that you had one young man who was very sick for a few days. He had no wounds. Do you remember that case?
Yeah.
Would you mind talking about that?
He was sometimes, being over in the jungles and things like that, people would have things that you just didn't know what it was. And I can picture him now. He was a nice young man, about 23, and the doctor was sitting by his bedside. He was one of the patients that they would not leave. The doctors would just sit there sometimes and talk with them and everything. And I remember the doctor saying, I want to go get a cup of coffee. And he said, can you, sit here? So he left to get coffee, and I started talking to him. And then all of a sudden, he just stopped talking and just closed his eyes. And at first, I thought he was, just going to sleep. And he actually had stopped breathing. So we had to start CPR on him and everything. And we called down to the anesthesiology people. They would come for that, and they came rushing down and they tried to get him going. They worked on him quite a bit, but we couldn't bring him back. And to this day, I just can't get that out of my mind because it happened on my watch. And the doctor had just left to get the coffee, and things like that happen.
Wasn't it also at this ward that you had to deal with Viet Cong patients?
Well, the POW, I didn't have Viet Cong on this particular ward, but I had them when I was in Long Binh. We had the whole ward was POW.
And can you describe some of those patients and your interactions with them?
The POW ward?
Right, because I think I remember you saying about how the Viet Cong would be brought in, they would be medically treated and guarded by the MPs, only to then be shipped out.
Yes, I think probably that had something to do with the fact that they never were that friendly with us, because we tried to be friendly and treat them just like we would any patient. I certainly had a feeling that I wanted to, reach out to them, but they never really responded too well to that. And it was probably because they knew once they were better, we had to send them to the South Vietnam soldiers. And they knew that once they got into their hands, their life might not be too long. And often that was the case.
Was there much time to relax?
In the 95th evac? Oh, I would say not too much. On when we were on duty, we were always very, very busy. And like I said, sometimes the doctors would not leave. And my Dr. Straight actually wrote me a prescription that I had to leave work. He told me to go home, and I said, no, I want to stay and help the nurses on the other shifts. And he said, no, go home. And then he wrote, I guess in fun, he wrote me a prescription to, take off and go home and rest. Because we were so busy. And the kind of patients that we had, you can see why.
Could you describe any R&R time that you took? How did you spend it?
Oh, that was a treat to have that, to be able to go on R&R. And I went to, when I was in Long Binh, I went to Tokyo, Japan, and that was really great to see the culture and everything. I enjoyed that. The other places that I got to go, I went to Taiwan, I went to Thailand, and I went to Hong Kong. Hong Kong, I really, really was fascinated by that, and I thought, this is my place. I loved Hong Kong so much, and it's because of the diversity there. I mean, you'd see these little boats in the water, and then you'd see these big, they were like boats where people would actually go in their restaurant boats that'd be out there. And so, and when you're in a restaurant boat having something to eat, you look down and you see all these little boats going by in the Hong Kong harbor. It was just a lot of things going on there.
How did you cope with the stressors of the duties and atmosphere in Vietnam?
Oh boy. Well, if I can take you back to my first tour, and I know people would think this is crazy, but they used to show movies on the back of buildings. They had these, they called them Connex boxes, I think. Where Connex boxes is a big metal container where they would bring in cargo and stuff like that. And then, you know, once they're there. So they would put the projector inside the Connex box and project the movie out on a building. And I used to go there and watch movies, and my favorite one to watch was Combat. It was from back in the day. And I'd be sitting there with my long raincoat on in the rain watching Combat, honestly. And sometimes I was the only one out there. Everybody else would have gone back to the dorm, to the hooches, I should say.
And were there any other ways that you relieved your stress? Did you fraternize with any of the other nurses? How did you spend time with other people in your unit?
Well, I would say that except for the 95th, I think my friendships were better there because I was in charge and I worked, you know, shoulder to shoulder with the people. But they did have, all the compounds that I worked on, they would have entertainers come to Vietnam, and you know, they were paid, like from the Philippines, and they'd have rock and roll bands and things like that. So, I mean, you'd hear that music wherever you were, so they'd have barbecues, things like that. I remember this one sergeant, we all got electric skillets from Sears and Roebuck's, and so we could cook in our room. And this one sergeant, he cooked steaks in bourbon. I think it was some kind of alcohol. And I had never heard of that before. So it wasn't too bad. You know, I tasted it, I have to say, but I remember things like that.
Speaking of food, what was the best and worst military food you were served?
Oh, if I have to remember, it's not very good, but this was I think it was in the 95th. When I got there, the mess hall was in bad shape, and they said it was because the person in charge was not doing their job. And there were windows, but they had no screens, and so there were flies in our food. I mean, when you come through, when you get a chance to come and eat, and you have to say, oh, you know, you dig in there and you have to, you know, the flies are there in the food swimming around. And when you get, you know, to the table to eat, their flies are trying to eat your food. But anyway, somebody took him away, I think, or he got transferred, and they got a new sergeant in the mess hall, and he screened that whole place up, and it just changed overnight, the menu and everything. I couldn't sleep at night sometimes, so I would go to the mess sergeant and say, "Can I help you cook?" Now I'm a head nurse of a ward, but I would be back in the mess hall cooking the breakfast with him, and then at 7 o'clock I'd be there on the ward to work. But I did that a lot.
Would you be able to tell us a funny story you experienced that could only happen in the military?
Oh, well, this is a memory I have. We had Vietnamese women who worked on the post. They did a lot of things, and sometimes they would want to try to sneak food past the sergeants when there were guards there all the time, and so they would check people coming in, check people going out. So some of these women would pretend they were pregnant, and underneath their kimonos they would have a turkey or something, and so sometimes the sergeants would not pat them down and just let them go, I thought that was kind of funny. And also some of the nurses would have the women do their laundry, but after a while they would notice that their underwear was missing. So that was kind of funny.
That is funny. So let's transition to life after Vietnam. What was your return home like? How were you greeted?
Well, I actually had a lot of problems with not being debriefed at all from my first trip to Vietnam or my second trip. So you get off the airplane, and one day you're in Vietnam, the next day you're back in the States. And we didn't have a brass band or anybody there to welcome us. The people would say, "Oh, you were in Vietnam," and then if you try to say anything, they were, their eyes would kind of glaze over. They didn't really want to hear too much of what you did or any of your problems. So I just didn't share much with the people in the States. Actually, I didn't really get any help until about 1985 from my time in Vietnam, because I just had so many physical problems of insomnia. The insomnia was terrible. Nightmares, my hair fell out, things like that happened to me. All the while I'm working other jobs, but I just couldn't sleep.
What's your most vivid memory of the Vietnam War?
I would have to say, well, there's a lot, but one night, this was in Long Binh, and we did not have running water on the wards. They would bring these big cans, I think they were like 5-gallon cans of water, and they would put them outside the wards each day. So it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had to go out and get some water so that I could start giving out my meds. So while I was outside the ward, I looked up and I saw this thing, and it looked like a flying telephone pole that was all lit up, sparkly and everything. And somebody told me later it was a mortar, but I could just reach up almost and touch it if I went straight up. It went right over my head, went right over the hospital compound, and it landed up in the Long Binh ammunition dump. And it started blowing up everything. And when I opened the door to go into the ward, that's when it hit. And all my patients who different degrees of rehabilitation managed to get under their beds and pull the mattresses over them. And I wasn't sure what it was, because that was unfamiliar to me, like a mortar coming into an ammunition dump. But I guess the soldiers were, knew that that's probably what happened. So that was 3 a.m. That thing kept making a lot of noise and blowing up, until about noon the next day.
Maurine, tell us how your military experience has impacted your life today.
I would say basically very positive. I spent 27 years in federal service. 4 of those years were active duty, included my time in Vietnam and all that. In 3 years, I worked for the Veterans Hospital. Also worked for Department of Defense Overseas Schools, where I worked for the Air Force and Army schools. So I had an opportunity when I signed up in college with that recruiter. It's given me a lot of experience, and I got to see the world. I grew as a person. I think that it's taught me to be more organized and to really try to find solutions instead of just complaining about things.
Okay. What are your feelings about the Vietnam War now looking back?
Well, I think of the Vietnam War like most wars today. I think that the politicians have walked away from the starting some of these wars. Some of them, of course, with Vietnam have died off, and the soldiers are left to carry the wounds of the war. Now we have other wars, more recent wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, things like that. And actually, I feel like they have had it more difficult than maybe questionable, but we didn't have the IUDs that some of these soldiers have had to deal with. I rode my bicycle all over in the train, and I never went over an IUD, So although I know that in those days there were plenty of booby traps in Vietnam and plenty of injuries from them, but I think that the Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans have really had it hard.
Do you feel like you have been shown appreciation and respect for your service as a Vietnam veteran?
I've had some, difficult times during my service, and I've had some sexual harassment on my tours and some, I would say, racism. But I balanced that out as I was able to deal with it, or in some cases I did report some of the things, and some people took care of it, some of the issues. So I think I got more out of it, and I like to think that way, positive.
Okay. What are some of the things you carry as a result of your time in Vietnam?
Well, I still can't take somebody coming up behind me and saying boo, things like that, just in fun, and it makes me jump. I think that yes, I have been diagnosed with PTSD, and I didn't get that diagnosis until about 1997, and I had to deal with the pain of thinking there was something wrong with me, that I just couldn't understand why I couldn't feel happy. But when I got diagnosed with PTSD, then I understood, that some of the things that I had repressed a lot of things, and I had to deal with it. Now I don't have so many nightmares and things like that.
Is there anything that you would like for students to know?
I would say that when I went to Vietnam in that era, we went because of love of our country, right or wrong, and we stayed because we cared about each other, and especially the soldiers. Even now with Iraq and Afghanistan, you see where soldiers will re-enlist and they want to go back and go back and go back, and you think, why do they want to do that? It's not the politics. It's because there's a job to be done, and they want to help their fellow men do it. And a lot of times, I would say it doesn't matter if they're black or white, that they want to help each other. So politics often gets in the way. I think that young people need to know that, and diplomacy is the best thing rather than war.
Thank you so much for
my experience in Auschwitz was, you really can't describe it. It's sort of visual because you can see where the people came, and you know that they came thinking that they were going to be in a work camp of some kind, but before the day was out, a lot of them were dead. And they have displays there at Auschwitz, which you can see, and they're displays of the artifacts that these people left behind, um, there's one big room that contains the hair that they cut off the victims, and you'd see these long plaits or braids. Then they also have a room full of I call them holiday suitcases, because in those days people would put stickers on their suitcase, like if you'd see where they had been, like in France or England, and they had piles of those. And also which is another one which is hard to see, is the room full of prostheses that they took off people. You know, that had a missing leg or something. It was difficult to see that. But I was glad that I had the opportunity, because I've spoken about it to other people, and this is what can happen when things get out of control.
In high school, you were discouraged from pursuing an education outside of high school. Not only did you graduate from Hampton, but you went on to continue your education after. Would you mind talking to us a little bit about that?
Yes, because I was in the military, I was able to continue going to school, and while I was working for the military as a civilian in Germany, I was working as a school nurse. I took the opportunity to take quite a few classes in Germany, and I started working on a counseling degree through Troy State University, and I did graduate with a master's in counseling, and that counseling did help me a lot with my school nursing. Later on, when I was having a lot of physical problems, I got finally diagnosed with PTSD, and that opened an opportunity for me to get some more education, because people who had been diagnosed as PTSD were able to get vocational retraining. I mean, for example, if you were a soldier who was on a tank, for example, a gunner, you can't necessarily do that in America, so the government would retrain people. So I was qualified for this retraining, and that was great. So I had already started taking some classes in Providence, CCRI in Rhode Island College. So when I got diagnosed with PTSD, they said, well, what would you like to study? And I said, well, I'm already taking these theater classes, because I had wanted to do that when I was 17 in high school. And so they said, okay, we can do that. And my counselor suggested that I go to Emerson, because they had a really good program there in theater. So I was able to get into Emerson, and I graduated in 2006 with a master's in theater education. And I said, finally I made it. They wouldn't let me do it when I was in high school. They didn't want to talk to me, but I finally made it. So I tell young people today, don't give up on your dreams. It took me a whole career as a nurse to finally get to study theater, but fortunately I think I had a gift for writing, because without any training at all, I had written about 20 plays, directed them in community and in schools, and I like to write poetry and things like that as well.
Would you like to share some of that with us?
Well, I have a poem that I wrote about Normandy, and this poem reminds me of my experiences at the 8th Field Hospital, when I would look out the window of the ward where I was working, and I would see the mortuary, which was right next door, and I'd see the trucks coming in with body bags and the effects of the soldiers, and they would set up tables outside where they would place the effects of the soldiers so that they could organize them and send it back to their family. That was always hard to see, somebody's life sitting out there, a photograph, sometimes guitars and things like that. So I wrote this poem came to me about Normandy. I had never been to Normandy, but it kind of clicked with my experience of seeing those effects. So I'm gonna read a little bit of it. Okay? It's called Over the Coast of Normandy. Forever comes the shining sun. Upon the waves of solemn doom, it warms the dead and the fallen. Over the coast of Normandy, the butterflies have all gone. The peace long shattered, the sand lying deep in blood. Over the coast of Normandy, the act breaks this calm, as battered planes drone across the fields, carrying young men of fierce hope and fading dreams. Over the coast of Normandy, so many died that day, the weary, the brave, and the young. Their eyes closed slowly as the sun set. The clutched pictures of their loved ones were left fluttering in the breeze over the coast of Normandy. I would like to read you something that I wrote about Normandy years later when I was working in Germany as a school nurse. I had an opportunity to go to Normandy, and I would like to just tell you about that experience. There is one thing that many Americans do not know. There is an Allied cemetery high above those cliffs today that holds the best of America's children. It is located above Omaha Beach at Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, France. There are 9,386 souls resting. The sky on a clear day is the bluest blue. The cypress trees stretch out their arms as if to say, "Come, I will care for you forever." There is only the noise of the wind blowing across the rows of white crosses, many with stars of David. It is a most beautiful place. A mother could feel the sense of peace for the final resting place of her son on that promontory beneath earth and heaven. The silent stroller seems enveloped as he walks in the midst of the crosses. No one speaks above a whisper. There is a deep sense of respect for these men representing all the armed forces. One feels the immensity of the sacrifice of those long-lost men who perhaps lived only 10 minutes after touching French soil. The advancement of the troops that day was because of the men who paved the way with their bodies. If these men had to die on that day, 6th June 1944, then how fortunate to be buried on a piece of real estate with so much majesty and beauty, which is located as the seagulls fly only an ocean away from the Bronx and Brooklyn. Beautiful. These are some paintings that I brought back from Vietnam, and when I had the rare time that I had some time off, I would go down to the villages and just shop around. Sometimes I would buy material, but I really liked the paintings. This picture of the girl in the white dress was done by a Saigon painter, and I've had that on display ever since I came back from Vietnam. I actually had to take it off the wall today to bring it here. And the other pictures are pictures that I'm not sure which towns that I think they're from Nha Trang, but I really like paintings, and so whenever I traveled, I would try to bring something artistic back home.